Hi, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show. Today's going to be an awesome show. We have a young lady whose journey started in the Midwest to the bright lights of LA to the warm, settled town of Seattle, Washington. We talked for quite some time on the phone, and her story is definitely one of interest. I'd like to welcome to the show, Catherine Grace O'Connell.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here, and I could have talked to you forever yesterday as well. It was a delightful conversation and not your run-of-the-mill conversation, which is what your podcast is all about.
Thank you so much. You know what, Catherine, let's start out with telling the viewers a little bit about you before we get deep into your beautiful story.
Sure. Well, I love that you introduced me as a young lady. So I am 62 years young. I am passionate about age positivity. So it's all about, shining a beautiful light on these years at midlife and beyond and embracing our age while disrupting the aging process. So, like as you said, I am from the northern suburbs of Chicago originally, and I left a crazy marriage, moved out to LA to get my master's in spiritual psychology. I've been on a deeply spiritual path for over 30 years now, doing a lot of beautiful inner work, and that really led to my being able to save my own life, which is the story we'll get into today, because I almost lost my life to late stage Lyme disease. It wasn't that long ago, but really came from a pretty crazy past, and all of that was really an energy that led to a lot of illness and almost losing my life, but then finding and creating a new life now.
You know what? People would probably look at this particular story with awe, because it started out with a disease, something called Lyme disease. And tell the viewers a little bit about what Lyme disease actually is.
Sure. So actually, if we were getting to get into a little bit more of the medical side, which is kind of interesting, if you look under a microscope, Lyme, the Lyme bacteria, is a corkscrew bacteria. It looks identical to syphilis. So it's pretty wild. It screws into your tissues and organs, and it proliferates in your system. So a lot of times people are not diagnosed, like me, misdiagnosed for over 10 years. So in that period of time, it goes dormant. It screws into those tissues and organs, and it starts proliferating around your system, but it doesn't activate until certain things happen. And for me, that is either trauma, or it's also antibiotics make it go active. So in which case it was in my brain. And so, but in general, Lyme disease it comes from a tick, but also now it can be spread other ways. But originally, that's how most people get Lyme disease. I ended up getting it in the Midwest. I lived right next to a forest preserve that had deer there. The deer had a tick on it, and that tick bit me and ended up with Lyme disease. But most people who get Lyme disease do not get this bull's eye rash. Only about 20% of people do. So otherwise, you just might feel terrible. Maybe it's flu-like symptoms. Most doctors end up missing it and never testing for Lyme disease. So it can be a really tricky process, and a lot of people catch it very late. In my case, I literally was a walking dead person because I had it for over 10 years by the time I was diagnosed.
Wow. So let's go back. The Midwest. Woo! Chicago, Indiana.
Been to Indy many times, many times.
Yeah, as I said, we're pretty much neighbors. What was
Yeah.
it like growing up in the Midwest for you as a child? Tell me a little about your family, because let me explain to the viewers what's about to happen here. We got 30 minutes to take you into her life. And she's mentioned something earlier before she introduced herself. And she mentioned trauma, and she mentioned universal spiritual connection. Bear in mind, this is her story. So like I share with people, the audience, it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about her journey and what she went through and her experience. So let's not judge. Let's listen with compassion, understanding, and hopefully you'll walk away with a deeper sense of the human being that's on the show. So take us into your childhood a little bit. What's it like in the Midwest?
Sure. So I grew up on the north side of Chicago, originally a suburb called Skokie, and only lived there till I was about 3 years old. My father was an orphan, so he was abandoned as a child. He actually was raised at an orphanage, Mercy Boys Home in Chicago, so raised by the Catholic priests. And he had a very, very abusive childhood. He had abusive step parents that would put him back in the orphanage and ended up living there until he was 18, until he was off on his own. But I learned really later on, my father was a very angry man. He was an alcoholic. There was a lot of abuse in my childhood home. And unfortunately, I also personally experienced sexual abuse. So that when I talk about trauma, trauma is really obviously many of us have trauma in our lives. Trauma can be a car accident, trauma can be sexual abuse, trauma can be everything in between. So,
Mhm.
trauma really means that it's an experience that happens to us where it's traumatic. So, our conscious mind bypasses it and it gets pushed into our subconscious and oftentimes comes out later on. But this was my experience growing up in Chicago. And so, I did not have a normal, happy, healthy childhood. I didn't get, all that love and nurturing and a really strong sense of self. So when you are sexually abused, what I learned through a great deal of therapy was your immune system is the boundary of the body. When you're sexually abused, that boundary is gone. So you're energetically wide open to all kinds of things, not to mention that then my personal story and the story of a lot of people who have walked that path, you have a very different sense of yourself because as a young girl, as a child, you tend to blame yourself for things that happen,
Mhm.
particularly these things with your parents. So I took that on. Obviously, this is not conscious, very subconsciously, but I had a terrible sense of self-worth from this experience and going through life. And I continued to sort of replay this, attracting other situations into my life that kept showing me how bad I was because that's what I believed. And that's the things that happens to us in life and traumatic experiences and anything like that. We tend to wrap a story around it. And that story, ultimately, if we wrap it enough, tell ourselves it over and over, it becomes us until we decide to consciously really get to the root of it and unwind that story and create a new story, a healthy story going forward, which is really my story.
When you talk about trauma on any level, it usually doesn't manifest until another part of trauma comes in. I call that the skeleton in the closet effect.
Mhm.
Let's go back a little bit. You talked about your father and your mom. Um, what was their life like? Because usually when we're dealing with those kind of issues, whether it be abuse, sexual, mental, verbal, whatever, I always tell people it starts in the womb and it starts with our parents and their parents and their parents. Your parents were adopted. Well, your father was. What
He
was
wasn't adopted. He was actually abandoned and lived in an orphanage. So he was never adopted, which is a big
wow?
part of the trauma wound there
That's
when
even
you're not
worse.
adopted. You're
What
rejected, right?
what was his what from what you know about your father and your mother, what was their childhood like?
So, in particular, I learned a great deal. I know I shared this with you yesterday on our call. When my father passed away, I actually learned more about him after he passed away than when he was alive. I knew that he had a lot of trauma. Certainly, there were some stories, but he was not someone who was opening up. He was someone who was very closed, and there was a lot of rage in him. So when he passed away, I had myself, four brothers, and then there was another sister in the will. So I had a half sister that I didn't know existed. And I had, obviously, she had a mother, and I met her mom, and I learned all of these things about my father through them, which was pretty crazy and eye opening that here there was another daughter who was 10 years older than me. We actually grew up in the same house. Unknowingly, so just some pretty wild stuff. But my dad, he from this experience of growing up, and he had a mom initially, but I guess he was my understanding this, he was a bastard child of a Hollywood star. And this is coming from his other wife that I then met, who told me all of these things. So my dad's mom, he actually did know her, but she kept putting him in the orphanage because she would get have a man come into her house, maybe marry the man. The man would abuse my father, treat him horribly. She would put him back in the orphanage. So he went in and out of the orphanage, and then ultimately was raised there by the priest. So this gives you a horrific sense of self for this child, and what you were talking about, this
He
generational trauma.
molested at all while he was going through these different
Yes.
transitions?
So, and that came out later as well. So I actually, my step, not my stepsister, my half sister, her mother told me that my father had been so traumatized by the experiences of being abused, sexually abused, molested, all of the things that he'd gone through with these different revolving, temporary fathers moving into his life and then going back and forth in the orphanage. When he was 13 years old, he got into a truck and he ran over his stepfather and killed him. I had
What?
no idea this happened. Yes. So I learned this after my father had passed away, but that's the kind of level of trauma we are dealing with. Yeah, I was like that. Oh my God. Had
Wh-
no idea.
When you hear about this, how do you feel knowing that you was in a situation that truly wasn't of your doing, but unfortunately you had individuals in the house that caused the confliction on you? Was it confliction on your other brothers and so? But you just found out about the sister. Was there any abuse with the with your brothers?
There was abuse from the standpoint of my dad was a rage-filled man. He was yelling, screaming, swearing, like just it was constant terror. And he'd, whip you with his belt and pull your pants down, all that stuff. That was very typical in my household. As far as I know, I don't believe my brothers were sexually abused, and that is something that I happened to me and was very, very hard for me to even talk about. And so I know I shared with you on the call yesterday, one thing that helped me a great deal was going through some really good therapy and understanding that when someone, particularly a child, is sexually abused, they have this compulsion to do it to somebody else at the very same age. And so I had an innate amount of compassion, not necessarily when I was, 3 and 4 years old when this was happening, but later on, really, I knew my father was in so much pain and I knew that he couldn't help himself. But to really understand that from a psychological standpoint,
Mhm.
that he really couldn't help himself. So I made a decision early on that I was not going to repeat that trauma. Hurt people, they say, but hurt people don't have to continue hurting people, and someone has to break the cycle. So
Where
for
was your
me,
mom? Where was your mom during all this?
my mom, I believe that she knew what was going on and that she did not help me, and that became a lifelong pattern even in my abusive marriage that I left. When I went to her for help, there was no help. And it was not just no help, you stay there and I don't see what's going on. I don't acknowledge it. So that became, these are patterns that happen. And
Did you
unfortunately,
share this with your new sister that you
I did not.
just
I have
located?
not shared that with her. That is such a law. That was a show in and of itself in the conversations I had with her. My half sister it was very difficult for her because she believed that my father had abandoned her. So then she
She
met
had her
me.
own set
It
of
was
issues that she
complicated.
was dealing with too.
Right. She was dealing with her own stuff. So I've actually never shared that with her.
Did you find any similarities to your stepsister's mom and your experiences with
Not,
as it relate to your
yeah.
parents?
More so with my married parents, my mom and my dad, versus the first Ginny was her mother's name. Terry's my half sister. Her mom's name was Ginny, and Ginny was lovely and beautiful. And after meeting her and learning more of the story, I really learned that she was my father's true love, and both of them had. My father had so many wounds that he pushed the woman away who really loved him more than anything. So she was healthy. She took her daughter out to protect her at the age of 2. Terry was 2 years old. So she was a very healthy parent, was going to do whatever she could to protect her daughter from my father because she realized he wasn't going to change his ways. He was a raging alcoholic. He was cheating on her, all these horrible things.
Mhm.
So my mom was not as healthy. My mom also came from an alcoholic household. Her father was an angry, abusive man. So she was continuing to repeat those patterns. And she really decided, in my case, to really look away from the abuse.
When you say that, you said something. Let's go back a minute, which I didn't even know. Your father ran over his stepfather and killed him.
13 years old.
What
13 years.
happened to your father? What happened with that situation?
I have no idea because this is coming way after my father has passed. This is, I'm meeting them because Terry's name is in the will, and I don't even know there's a Terry,
Right.
or there was a Ginny, her mom. So I'm learning this through them, and I actually went through like the Chicago papers and all that to see if I could find anything from back in the day. But he was 13 years old, so I imagine it's one of
They
those
probably
things.
killed all those documents.
Exactly. I have no idea. I imagine he was so young and he was an orphan and he wasn't ever prosecuted. I really don't know any of the details. All I know is, like your reaction, I was just jaw to the floor,
How do
absolutely
how do you
mind blown to hear
how
this.
do you what's your next step? You're older now. Most individuals would have probably ran away. I'm just
And
saying
what
most
ran
individuals,
away from
just
the
what
house.
was going on in your house.
Mhm.
But you get older, you stayed there, you endure what you consider was normal.
Mhm.
It was normal.
It's
Um,
normal and you don't talk about it. So in those kind of families, and particularly in North Shore of Chicago, it's very Stepfordish in that you are taught to put a beautiful front up, a beautiful face up, a beautiful home behind scenes, anything, any of the, like you said, skeletons, those are way in the closet. Nobody talks about it. I don't
leave
talk
the
to my
smoke and
parents. I don't
mirrors.
tell them, yeah, what's going on. I don't get help. I don't get therapy. Those things are not part of this is all to look perfect on the outside and the mess is left inside. And I had to deal with that stuff on my own, really. So there's nowhere for me to run to. First of all, where am I going to run? And second of all, this is all I know. So is there anywhere else that's normal?
Well, you did
I don't
run
know.
somewhere. You ran to LA.
I was a lot older and leaving a messed up marriage, but I had more junk to go through before I was really old enough, wise enough, and to be able to not be so terrified. Because I know in our conversation yesterday, you asked me why didn't I leave my marriage? Because my marriage was
And let's talk
it was my
about your
childhood
marriage.
on steroids.
Let's
Pardon
talk
me.
about let's talk about your marriage. The first marriages. You leave in a situation, you still haven't sought help. You know norm, the normal is what you've been exposed to. So you get into it because most times that carries on into our first relationship. How did that transpire for you?
So of course I married my childhood on steroids. So I married a very abusive man and who presented certainly not to be abusive. And then he got me and reeled me in, rushed me down the aisle, and we were married really fast. And it was pretty abusive from the get go. But I also then within a year I was pregnant and had a child and then had my second child. So in those situations, I was definitely attracting a situation that was very similar to my childhood marriage. My parents had, a not a loving marriage. There was a lot of yelling and screaming and swearing in the household. They had separate bedrooms. My dad was an alcoholic. Of course, I married someone who was an alcoholic. Like just repeating, not consciously, these are energetic patterns. So this is something I am unconsciously comfortable with. So I've attracted someone now who only reinforces this image to me that you're worthless. And he would literally say that you are a worthless piece of fill in the blank, day in, day out. And so I, um, I did the best that I could to raise my children by putting them in a little bit of a bubble and not letting them know what I was dealing with. I was keeping that sort of compartmentalized and separate, kind of like what I learned growing up. And I stayed until I couldn't stay anymore. I literally broke in two, and it was my doctor saying, "You don't get out, you're not going to make it." So that's what caused me to leave after 20 years.
You you married a well-known individual. We don't have to mention his
Mhm.
name. That's, but you married money. Let's
I
call it
didn't
what it
marry
is.
money. I married a name. I didn't marry money.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
We'll separate the two. The family, yes, they were a big name, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of money in generational wealth and all that.
Yeah.
But there's different family members, and the family that I actually married into had spent most of their money. They lived big. They always lived big.
Right.
So yeah, so there wasn't a lot of money when I got married. I didn't marry for money.
You didn't
I
you
Yes,
didn't see no signs ahead of time before 22 years. You didn't
yeah.
see some signs or symbols, red flags
There were
prior.
there yes. There were some red flags. They did not get gigantic like you'd wave in front of a bull until after the marriage. So there were definitely some red flags, but there is again, understanding psychology. The person who I married put out a really charming front. There's this whole persona in order to get what they wanted. He wanted me. I checked all the boxes, and but the real abuse didn't start until after we were married and after I got pregnant. So
What
it's
did he
like,
want from you? You just mentioned that. He checked the boxes. Now that you look back, what was he checking off his box that he needed in his life? Because evidently he didn't need you because he degraded you and so forth. So what was the check marks that he checked to even get you?
so he had been married before, first of all. So he'd been divorced for 10 years when I met him, and he was still carrying the rage and anger of this first marriage and his first wife cheating on him within 6 months, 10 years later. So that's the person that I'm marrying, first of all. So, and not really understanding this. So he had been single for 10 years now. And I looked the part. Okay. He'd say, "You're high profile, you're this, you're that." So I looked really good. I would make that perfect little wife on the North Shore of Chicago. I would create the perfect little children. I would create the perfect little home. And he would go to work and live on the golf course and never be part of any of it. Of course, I didn't know any of that. There's no understanding of that ahead of time. I actually thought he'd be this great dad, and I was like, whoa, pretty surprised that I had no husband and no father for my children the whole time. So, but I filled a mold. He could now be married, have children, live in the right suburb, have the right home, the right wife, the right look of everything, but he was never there part of any of it from really day one of my having children.
Let's go a little bit further than that. I have good memory. You had a recurrence of an old friend called Lyme. What was that like living with him, having your kids, and now having this dormant illness show its ugly face again when you're already dealing with the trauma in your household, marriage, kids? Now you got a life-threatening illness resurfacing itself.
So the diagnosis of the illness didn't come until after I'd left the marriage and I'd moved to LA. So I was in and out of the hospital though during the marriage. So during the marriage, I was really sick. I looked like this, and I would go into the doctor and they'd say, "It's all in your head." And I'd be like, "No, I mean, these things are really happening to me." So, and then I would have spinal meningitis. I would have my colon resectioned. I would have surgery upon surgery to major illness, on antibiotics constantly, in and out of the hospital and the doctor's offices. So, but I was never formally diagnosed with Lyme disease until I left the marriage. And that is when I saw a doctor who was the doctor of last resort and saw a lot of people with Lyme. And she put together that I had 2 cases of spinal meningitis that were 10 years apart. And that is a very common complication with Lyme disease. So I had my first case of spinal meningitis when I was married. I had 11 spinal taps all by myself. I'd have to find a way to the hospital myself, sit there and have spinal taps by myself, get a ride home by myself, have surgeries by myself. I never had a husband with me for any of it. He would
Where was he
literally
at? Where was he at?
he would leave me to die. He would say, "See you going to play golf." So, and leave me to die.
Where were
So
your
that
kids?
is the
Where were your
severity.
kids at?
They
Where,
were there. They were there. They were not old enough to take me to the hospital or really to understand. I wasn't going to go tell them your father is going to the golf course while I'm dying. But I would certainly call friends or call family members to come help me because yeah, I almost died a number of times when I was married.
what were your friends saying during this time? At least you had a somewhat of a support. Didn't they ask you, okay, where in the hell is this husband of yours? Why ain't he watching his kids? And more importantly, why isn't he in the hospital with you when you're about ready to die?
It's interesting, when I shared with you yesterday, like I would tell my mother all of these things and my brothers, nobody would ever say a word to him. So this is the frame that I'm coming from, right? So I had one friend that was the one who would call my doctor and help me and find a way to the hospital, but she also was in an abusive marriage. Our joke was our husbands like were friends because each one of them made the other one look good because they were both sort of the worst of the worst. But this is what I was dealing with. So I have a framework of being raised in a family that is not going to see my abuse, is not going to help me in any way. And then I have my best friend who's also being abused, and certainly other people knew, but not necessarily to the same extent. It's not like I'm going out there and telling everyone, my husband's left me to die, help. A lot of times this is the model where I would just keep it inside and tell the people closest to me. But again, my family isn't looking at me and helping me or won't say a word to him.
Because your family's probably used to the norm, and that was norm to them.
They're used to the norm. And you know what? The bottom line is my mother liked this big name, liked the fact that I had married into someone in the social register or somebody. That was the right country clubs. That was very important to her. And so I can't understand that. I can't relate to that at all. But that is what I was dealing with. And so it was, I'm going to look away. You stay in that marriage no matter what.
Wow, that's crazy. But unfortunately, you did have a life death experience during these moments of your life. Take the viewers down that and what that was like, because you're one out of a million, I would say, that had
Yeah.
this experience.
It's so yeah, there are not many people. So
Okay.
on this is fast forwarding. I left, Chicago, gosh, in the spring of 2011, and this is now spring of 2014, and I'm diagnosed with late stage Lyme disease. And I had been having a major 2 weeks in the hospital not long before this, my second case of spinal meningitis right before then. And so by the time I was diagnosed, it took 4 months to get a diagnosis. By the time I was diagnosed and I started treatment, I was having full body seizures. So they were 3 to 8 hours a day. That entire year, I was bedridden. I couldn't do anything for myself. I went down to under 100 pounds. I'm 5'9", over 30 pounds less than I have on me now. And Cedar Sinai last right, all my organs shutting down. And so by 11/11/14, so I'm diagnosed in March of 2014. By 11/11/14, I'm having a near death experience. So it's
Hey,
that
Catherine, hold
fast.
that thought for a minute. There's a question I want to ask. All this time, what kind of tests were performed on you? And before we go back to 11/11/14, how do you feel about the fact that this, with the technology, MRIs, CAT scans, blood work, nobody could treat this or diagnose you with this until this? How does it make you feel? Let's go right there.
You know what? It's a very common experience for women in particular, and let's say women who don't come from healthy backgrounds, because then you don't necessarily assert yourself properly, right? So not to me to blame, but to say this is again that ongoing pattern of not being believed or heard. So it was doctor upon doctor upon doctor upon doctor, basically dismissing things or just treating a symptom, but never looking for the root cause, that here is someone who is constantly sick, constantly having surgery or in and out of the hospital or on antibiotics, always, always sick. So first of all, there's abuse. So definitely didn't even see that. But secondarily, there's something underlying. There's something at the root of this. This is not just, let's treat this with antibiotics or this with antibiotics. There's some major illness under here. So that's what took so long. And it took me getting to a doctor who was an integrative medicine doctor who straddles both alternative world and the Western world.
Okay.
So still to this day, Lyme disease is so misdiagnosed, mistreated, misunderstood, stigmatized. So it's not like your typical illness of cancer, and I'm not dismissing that in any way, but those we have real treatment protocols. We have doctors that know what to do and to look for things and to do tests. In the Western model, it's frequently missed. So actually, it's the alternative model that you go to, and you'll go to an integrative MD, and a lot of times they will be the ones to find Lyme disease and to order these very special tests that then can diagnose Lyme disease, whereas the Western blot test done by Western doctors oftentimes actually misses it. So it's if you even get to someone to run the test, oftentimes that result is actually missed in the Western model. So that's why I believe so wholeheartedly in the integrative model, because it's all about looking for the root of the illness, not just treating the symptom.
Let's go back to 11/11/14. Tell me about that particular moment of your life.
So 11/11/14. Now this is kind of crazy. I know I shared it with you yesterday. I was actually supposed to be in Chicago for a court date with my ex-husband, which I couldn't even walk, and I'm full-time care, so it wasn't ever that I was going to get there. I had my best friend Dave staying with me. I had two male caretakers at the time. My ex-boyfriend, who's here now, my business partner, and my best friend Dave. My best friend Dave had been there, and I was really upset. I was in shock about this whole situation in Chicago, and I just told him to go home and I was going to go to bed by myself, just get in bed and stay there for the night. So he left, and almost immediately, it was a very strange sensation, kind of like out of Wizard of Oz. All of a sudden, everything around me was like black and white. There was this whooshing sound going through the house. It was like there was massive amount of wind going through the house, and it was this sort of just otherworldly experience where you really don't. I was in shock. I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but I also couldn't process it. So all I did was get under the covers in the bed, and all night long, I was just, my whole body, I had seizures, but these were different than seizures. I was like wriggling all night long like this, and my eyes wouldn't, like, they wouldn't close. They were just going open up, like constantly, like blinking all night long, but my whole body was just squirming and I couldn't stop it. So I was in sheer terror because I didn't know what was going on, but I knew something was happening and I knew it wasn't good. So I just stayed in bed. I didn't call for help. I couldn't even get to a phone. So I waited for the like first light of morning come through the blinds of the window, and I went to like get out of bed so I could go to the bathroom, and I go to lift my arm and there's nothing. This is literally like a ghost. I can feel nothing. There's no body, there's no weight. I tried to bring my legs over on the floor and I fell to the floor because there's no body there. And then I used my fingers to pull on the carpet to get me to the bathroom, and I went and pulled myself up on the bathroom sink. And again, I'm a weightless body. There's no physical body to pull, but that's like all I knew to do. And I went like this and I looked in the mirror and I went, "Oh my God." And there was no me there, and I see this apparition in the mirror. It is me, all lit up, walking out the door, like leaving my body and going.
Hmm.
And I knew in that instant that was me leaving me. And I was like, oh my God,
Do you
like
know where you was going subconsciously, or you basically had no idea because where you was probably still in fright?
I was in complete and total shock. I obviously knew in this moment that I was no longer here, that was me going out there. And again, keep in mind, I when I looked into the mirror, when you see yourself, you can see yourself. Like there was no me in there. There was no me to see. All I could see was that. So I was literally looking at myself as a ghost, and here's this like physical me all lit up straight out of like Ebenezer Scrooge walking out the door, and I was just looking at myself leaving myself, and I knew in that moment I was gone.
Really? How did you come back to your space? Because right now you're probably freaked the hell out.
I was freaked to hell out, and Michael, my business partner, happened to call on the phone, and I grabbed the cell phone, it was on the ground, and I grabbed the cell phone, and he said, "Oh, how are you?" And I just said, "I'm not here, I'm not here, I'm not here, I'm not here." And he was like, "What are you talking about?" And I tried to explain this experience to him, and of course he just thought I was out of my mind, and
Yeah.
I was, but in a very different way.
Right.
So I actually had my friend Dave came over. He picked me up. He was trying to take me over to Cedars-Sinai hospital at the time. Then one of my alternative practitioners called me and she said, "Don't go there. They will put you in the psych ward. They will think you're crazy. You are having a near-death experience. Let's get you to someone who can help you get back into your body because I'm
Now, who
still here,
told you
but I'm not."
who was the one that told you that you had a near death experience?
So this is a natural medicine doctor, my homeopathy doctor, actually, who said, let's get you to someone who can help you right now, sort of process what's going on. And at that point, all she did was help me get into my physical body so I could feel myself again. But I still didn't have, so I know I shared with you yesterday. I'll fast forward to a few days later when I went to this woman. Her name is Nicole Shire. She is what's called a soul coach, and she can see things on the other side that basically most people cannot see. So I sat across from her trying to understand what I'd gone through. And she looks at me and she goes, "Oh my God, I didn't know this was possible." And she said, "The vortex to the light is open. You've been walking around in a near-death experience." She said, "You have a choice now. You can stay or you can go. I can close the vortex and you can stay, or you can go up into the light."
Hold down for a second. Did she clearly explain to you what that actually meant? You're walking in the near death experience, so you're back into your body, basically.
I'm
Eh,
back in my body, but this other person who helped me just get back into my physical body didn't have the ability to see that literally there's this vortex. There's a vortex to the light. So when we die, this is all explained to me after this. I've gone to other people to really understand, process what happened to me. So when we die, the vortex of the light opened. There is a magnetic pull that pulls out your soul within 30 seconds to a minute. And that is in general all a human being can resist. There's no ability really for me to have gone through what I went through. So this woman who closed the vortex for me helped me to understand that I was a special soul. No one is supposed to be able to really endure that. This magnetic pull is too strong to pull your soul out of your physical body. And my physical body was extremely weak, but I was meant to be here and have this experience. So she said I was an uber soul, and this uber soul here to bring the light. And that's when I told her, to close the vortex and I would stay here because obviously there was some bigger reason for me to be here. But at that time, I was still really in shock of all of this and trying to process that. Okay, how many people get this choice? Okay, you can live or die. There's the vortex to the light. You're walking around near death experience. In a second, you can be up in the light, or I'm going to close it and you're going to stay here. But I don't even know why you're here. So it's a pretty
did she
crazy
explain
experience.
to you? I know that had to be a lot to try to comprehend at such a after going through what you just went through. More importantly, the individual that found you and took you, what were they saying? Were they there as part of this awakening and what she was sharing with you? How was they viewing what she was saying?
And are you talking about when I first just got back into my physical body
Yeah,
before I went to Nicole? So,
yeah.
the people that I was with couldn't see any more than I could at that point. I had no idea. I knew that I had gone through a near death experience. I certainly had no idea that I was walking around in it. In
Yeah.
other words, I just thought my soul was trying to leave. It came back. I couldn't feel me. And so she helped me get in my physical body. But I didn't understand that I was still in this in this near death experience, walking around with an open vortex to the light, where I had the opportunity to stay or go that basically nobody could do, not to mention the fact that it's virtually impossible. And that was the next week. I went to a mystic in LA who, again, can see these things as well. And he confirmed what Nicole had said to me. And he said, she's right. Everything she told you is true. You were walking around near death experience. She did close the vortex. You are a special soul. And literally within 30 seconds to a minute is all most physical bodies can resist, this pull, magnetic pull. So he
Part
did
question,
confirm all of this.
two-part question.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like walking around with the near death experience and then still having the portal open where you had the choice to either go or to stay? And then the other part of the question is, did they give you the recipe? If you stay, this is what you're going to, this is your mission. If you go, this is what's going to happen. They didn't give you none of those. So what was it like in walking in the near death experience, because you haven't went to the light yet?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when you came back into your conscious, into this vessel, what was the difference?
So I was still, as anyone who's gone through a really traumatic, shocking experience, that was a traumatic, shocking experience. And you're still, if you've had a lot of trauma, you disassociate a lot. So I'm used to that feeling of really being out of my body. So during that entire time, I was still very out of body. I was not, even though she physically put me back in my body and I could feel things again, a lot of times with people with trauma, we're existing out here somewhere and we're not really fully present in our body. So that's kind of what that experience was like. And I know as I am on the part two of that question, or part B here, um, before this, I really struggled with living. I had suffered a great deal my entire life. And now I was physically, mentally, emotionally suffering through this whole Lyme disease and being bedridden and able to care for myself. I mean, I could do nothing for myself. So I was miserable and I wanted to go. So I had two children. The only reason I could think about being here any longer was because of them. Other than that, I was like, it's awesome up there. I want to go with the angels. I'm really comfortable up there. I'm not so comfortable down here because you guys are pretty crazy humans. I don't understand you. So at that point, when I decided to stay, like you said, there's no roadmap. There's no roadmap for going. There's no roadmap for staying. Although I knew in my heart up there is a beautiful place. I wasn't so sure down here. But I made that decision to stay. And that came from a different place, basically understanding in some way at that time I was here for a greater purpose, because I didn't know what it was. I had no idea, but I knew in that moment, if I'm going through this experience that virtually no one else is ever going to have, you don't get this option where the light is open. You go, can you stay or go? It's just, you're gone.
Mhm.
So I knew this was a really wild experience, and it came from God, source, universe, something much greater than me. And there was a reason for me to be here. And I was going to trust that and stay and just keep following the breadcrumbs of the universe and God that they would put in front of me. And I'd say yes to them. And, again, there's a whole other story of how my whole life transformed inside
I
out.
guess it wasn't all about us. I think that's the problem that we run into. The bigger purpose is, I think, that we become self-absorbed and don't realize that, it's not about us. It's definitely a bigger mission. My hat's off to you for all of it, for overcoming, for conquering, for realizing that you had an opportunity you had two opportunities. You can stay or go. And you decided that the mission was a lot bigger, which was your children, to give them a different view on how the universe works, how we should operate in the universal law here on Earth. Um, what's the end game for you? What's the end game for you?
Well, my life completely changed after that. I mean, I know there's a whole other story and we can always talk about that another time, but I did have to bring myself back. It wasn't like all of a sudden my reality changed and, I was healthy. I still was very sick. And so I really took my toolbox out and transformed my life from the inside out, saved myself, saved my life, transformed my belief system, everything, the root of that trauma and all the beliefs I'd wrapped around it. So here I am now at 62, and I'm living a completely different reality than I lived before. I truly love myself. I have confidence and all of these things that I was searching for before, they were always here. And so that's the magic. All of these things are just beliefs. They're things that we take on when we're disempowered or lacking self-worth. All these things, we come into this world, these beautiful innocent beings, and we have all of these things and we lose them over time. So these years at midlife and beyond are a beautiful time of self-discovery, a time to go in and to find all these gifts. I have all these gifts that I didn't know existed. I'm creative. I didn't know I was creative. Like all of these things that I've unwrapped and unpacked and unwound these stories. So now I share this with others. I have 30 plus years of working in the inner world and all these natural tools that I'm a meditation teacher, all these things I've been trained in energy work. So I know they work, and I know that the best years of our lives are, at midlife and beyond. And not to, take anything away from youth. Youth is wonderful, but the longer we've lived, most likely, the more experiences we've gone through, and oftentimes the more challenging experiences, and the more wisdom that comes from that. It's the, friction on the oyster and that causes the pearl to form. So we're the pearls. And so I love sharing that with women. I love inspiring and empowering through my story. I love giving hope, and I love shining a beautiful light on these years at midlife and beyond, because it truly is the best time of a woman's life, and hopefully men too.
Before we wrap up, I'm gonna ask another question real quick. What was your belief system prior to all of these beautiful manifestations happening to you? What was your belief system like?
Well, I grew up in the North Shore of Chicago. Tends to be very, should we say, religious and Christian, conservative. And I grew up in a Catholic household. So I still have that beautiful Christ consciousness, shall I say, but I'm deeply spiritual. So over these decades, over 30 years ago, I found this spiritual path. And what I mean by that is really finding some amazing teachers that allowed me to really see something that was so much bigger. To me, religion puts these walls around us. We have these dogmas, believe this is good, this is bad. I don't believe that. All to me, all religions are good. There's a beautiful source energy up there. Call it God, call it Buddha, call it whatever you want. To me, I know in my heart there's this beautiful higher power guiding me and guiding all of us down here on earth. Excuse me. So all it has done is really opened me up to seeing life through the eyes of, love, through source, through, we're these human beings. We're really spiritual beings having a human experience. We're souls in this human body, the souls being the most important part. And when we connect to that, something so much greater than us, like you said at the beginning, it's not just about little old me. It's I'm here for a purpose and a reason. And it's really to bring love, to give hope. And yeah, that's a big part of my life's journey.
How can the viewers reach out to you to learn more about your story and what you're doing for the community and the services that you offer?
Thank you for asking. You can find me, Catherine Grayso, just by Googling me, but I'm over there on Instagram. I respond to every single message on my DMs. Not always every comment, sometimes there's way too many, but I do my best. But I'm very easily accessible over on Instagram. It's probably my most accessible platform. I also have a global community on Facebook. You can find me over there at Forever Fierce Midlife Matters. Also my Catherine Grayso page, my blog, Catherine Grayso. I have a podcast as well. So you can find me pretty much anywhere, but just Google Catherine Grayso and come on, join me over on Instagram. I've got a wonderful 30-day challenge coming up in January, and I'd love for you to come join me and hopefully inspire you.
Catherine, leave the viewers with something universally connected all of us together.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all the amazing work that you're doing and the incredible people that you have on and the stories that you're sharing that I know are transforming lives.
Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Crayton Show.